In his speech yesterday to the nation, President Biden certainly got some accolades. He got some attaboys, a recognition that Hamas is a terrorist organization from Democrats in today's world is considered a, whoo, look at you. So brave, so very brave. The speech itself had problems. The tone, the tenor, sure, you could argue that those were right on point. But a speech that is tone and tenor, you're talking about the sizzle and not the substance. Sizzle said in a sentence regarding Joe Biden. That's pretty funny. The substance brought about questions. Is Joe Biden, is his plan to so desperately tie Israel to Ukraine that funding happens for both? Should funding happen for both? At what numbers? Dependent upon one another? Is that a smart foreign policy? And when it comes to Israel, the attack from Hamas, a terrorist organization that murdered 1,400 and has captured American citizens, never mind killing American citizens, we should ask ourselves, well, are we dependent upon Israel to get our citizens back? And if we're dependent upon Israel, them knowing the terrain, them knowing the lay of the land, them certainly knowing Hamas, well, then we should be supporting them, which is different than whether or not we should be supporting Ukraine. And I say this as a guy who has said before that when it comes to ammunition, when it comes to the artillery to defeat Russia, I'm fine with it. I know we may disagree on that, but I think I can hold my own. But did Biden make a case that moves America and moves any level of policy? Guys, welcome to the show, presented by Americans for Prosperity, AmericansForProsperity.org, economic liberty, free speech. That's what it's all about, and that's what we do right here. This is Major Mike Lyons, retired United States Army West Point graduate, and does a tremendous amount of military analysis on radio and on television, and of course with us all the time. Let me share with you, Major, what it is, part of what President Biden said in that speech just yesterday.
It's just less war when connected. It benefits the people who would benefit the people of the Middle East and would benefit us. American leadership is what holds the world together. American alliances are what keep us, America, safe. American values are what make us a partner that other nations want to work with. To put all that at risk, if we walk away from Ukraine, if we turn our backs on Israel, it's just not worth it. That's why tomorrow I'm going to send to Congress an urgent budget request to fund America's national security needs, to support our critical partners, including Israel and Ukraine. It's a smart investment that's going to pay dividends for American security for generations. Help us keep American troops out of harm's way. Help us build a world that is safer, more peaceful, more prosperous for our children and grandchildren.
That, Major, is a heck of a statement that we fund fighting in Ukraine, helping Ukraine fight the Russians, that we will be safer, helping Israel, we will be safer. I don't know if that's conflation or not. Your take on his speech yesterday, sir?
I think overall pretty good, Tony. I think, I look at this through the eyes of a soldier, right? I don't look at the politics of it. I think that speech could have been made by a Republican on some level. But as a soldier, you hear your commander in chief talking about supporting interest groups and supporting countries that have our same values. What's going on in Ukraine and what happened in Israel. They're two separate wars. It's a conventional war taking place against a nuclear armed country in Ukraine. And then look how different the United States is acting with the situation in Israel, as there are no nuclear opponents anywhere in sight here. It's just, obviously Iran is the proxy for what's happening there. So I've got no problem with what he said. And I think on balance and on record, I think that we're doing the right thing in both cases.
Now, that there are plenty of people on the political right, and I'm on the political right, who disagree with that the funding for Ukraine is going nowhere. We have never given a strategic objective regarding the fight in Ukraine, and very much so it has become a litmus test. What Biden is doing, it looks like to many, is taking advantage of an opportunity. Oh, look at this terrible attack on Israel. Wait a second. We can make this work for us. Is it your take from people you speak to, from analysis, that's the case, that this is more craven than it looks like on the surface, or is there a value as you see it?
Well, they're not connected. They're two different things. The analogy of supporting Ukraine is almost similar to what we supported, the Mujahideen in Afghanistan by sending them Stinger weapons. I mean, we're sending Ukraine things that it needs. The artillery ammunition we saw the other day, ATACMS, so that we're taking stocks that were expired that we would have to have destroyed or done something else with, and we're sending to them that kind of equipment. It's still working for them. So I think that kind of works out. So as long as we're not sending troops on the ground, the scary word would be advisors, right? If we start sending advisors and they start getting involved, I think that would be something that we have to be concerned about. But I think what's happening in Ukraine there and Israel are going to be two separate things. The Israelis right now are looking for the Iron Dome rockets made by Raytheon, and they're looking for small arms ammunition. The naval support, you've got now independently deployed destroyers in the Red Sea. I think that's what I took from that incident with the Carney shooting down those Hamas, those Houthi rockets. So again, two different situations, and we're acting differently again because there's no nuclear power against us going on in the Middle East.
So when you talk about those Houthi rebels, those missiles from Yemen that were shot down by a U.S. destroyer that possibly were on their way to Israel, which would be Iran, which of course supports the Houthi rebels, engaging and attacking Israel from another side. Let me give you two voices here. Both candidates for president. This was former Vice President Mike Pence.
I'm someone that believes that America's the leader of the free world. We're the arsenal of democracy. And I've been a strong supporter of military aid to the war fighters in Ukraine. I think it's absolutely in our national interest to give Ukraine what they need to fight and repel the Russians, because I've no doubt that if Putin overruns Ukraine, it's not going to be long before he crosses a border where our men and women in uniform have to fight. So whether he should have paired them, but to make the case that we're the leader of free world, we ought to be supporting Israel shoulder to shoulder, no daylight between the U.S. and Israel. But I really do believe this is a moment in the wake of that failed and feckless foreign policy of this administration, the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, appeasement toward Iran and other actors in the world stage. We've got to get back to leading the free world, or frankly, the rest of the 21st century could look a whole lot more like the first half of the 20th century.
So that's former Vice President Pence, even questioning whether the two things should be tied together, but clearly saying that funding should happen for both. This is Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida.
Oh, well, we would have done almost everything different starting in January of 2021. I think Biden has created a situation in the world through his fecklessness, his weakness, that has caused these problems to mount. I was struck with the speech. There was just a lack of overall strategic vision for what we're trying to do as Americans. He never mentioned China, which is the top global threat to the United States. He wasn't discussing the threats that are now in our own country due to his open border policy. And then the way he was trying to act like Ukraine and Israel are similar. They're different problems, that require different approaches. So I think he missed the mark yet again. But ultimately, we need leadership. Biden's not providing the leadership. And, I also am very concerned about with the Israel, because he'll say that Israel has a right to defend itself. But then, he wants to send $100 million to the Gaza Strip. That money will be commandeered by Hamas terrorists. We know they run the show down there. So why would you want to be funding both sides of the conflict? He needs to let Israel do the job, let him annihilate Hamas, and that's got to be the first order of business. I don't think you can play both sides of this. It just isn't going to work.
They both discussed Joe Biden's foreign policy. So I want to ask you, when you see the Biden administration, a deputy White House spokesperson saying that Joe Biden is the first person to visit 2 war zones as president, they look at that as a brag. This isn't something to brag about. That means there are 2 wars under your watch. Former Chief of Staff Ron Klain said, in moments like these, thank God Biden is president and not Trump. But the question is, has this feckless foreign policy, as described by Pence and DeSantis, led to this moment? Your thoughts, Major?
Yeah, in some ways it has, because deterrence is failing, right? For whatever reason, deterrence has failed now in Europe. It's failing in the Middle East, and I think we're going to find out whether the foreign policy is going to be successful or not, because maybe our enemies are now looking for that red line in the sand that was drawn by President Obama back in the day in Syria, and then nothing happened from it. I think it was a positive sign that we're shooting those missiles down from Houthis. It's fundamentally we're shooting something coming from Iran. But I think that's the next test. I think we're talking a great game right now. We're doing all that, but I think the question is whether or not it's going to be enough to deter our enemies as they continue to press us. And what is the red line? The strategy in Ukraine is implied. It's just to hold off the Russians, keep the Russians from invading Ukraine and taking it over, but that's a different mission than restoring Ukraine's original boundaries from prior to 2014. He doesn't do a good job of explaining that, but that's what I perceive to be the mission there. The mission here in Israel now is destroy Hamas. I think there's going to be an issue of what next, that whole expression as to what happens. So I think they'll win militarily, but they're going to have to do some ruthless things. They're going to have to destroy tunnels and they're going to flood them. They're going to do things they hadn't done before. And I think the reason why they're not doing anything just yet is because they're concerned about those hostages, because once they have some large ground incursion, I think that for all practical purposes, it's going to be really difficult to get them back.
And the hostages are so much of this conversation because not only do Israelis have hostages, Americans have hostages, and some other nations have hostages as well. Yeah. So when we look at that question, it leads to, will there be, in your view, U.S. boots on the ground in Israel to help get American citizens out of Gaza?
Well, I hope not, and if it's only because we can do something that no one else can do. It is unfortunate that we haven't put more emphasis on that they're holding Americans, and again, get back to that deterrence factor if the enemy was concerned about that. But we likely have supporters and people helping the IDF do this. I think it was a good sign that we released that video or that audio from the two terrorist organizations talking about the failed bombing in the hospital, because it shows we're listening in. So we're collecting intelligence on it. But to try to get these hostages, babies, elderly people, they're going to be they're going to have to be carried out. This is not a situation where anyone's walking out of that anytime soon. So I don't know. I don't see you're going to see large troop formations. You're not going to see Marines hitting the beachhead or anything like that. But don't get me wrong. The fuse was lit October 7th, and that fuse is still burning. That fuse could lead to explosions in the north. That fuse could lead to Israel having to defend itself from the West Bank. We're ways from being over or getting any kind of peaceful resolution anytime soon.
And I'm certainly not somebody who follows along the lines of ceasefire, have to have a ceasefire. It seems to be a radical proposition when hostages are on the ground. And this all ends if Hamas gives back the hostages. Ukraine, you've got Israel. You have, of course, you have to wonder whether China is taking a much even stronger look at Taiwan, saying the U.S. is very much distracted. Now is very much the time. And, of course, China and Iran and Russia having that relationship. Is the U.S. military ready for all this?
There's a lot on the plate of the military right now. Each of the different branches have got their challenges. Recruiting on one side, the Army's troubled recruiting right now. The Navy is still trying to maintain an old fleet of ships. So they're decommissioning ships that just came on board 8 to 10 years ago that they thought were going to last a lot longer. The Air Force obviously continues to project power for us, but I think we're at a spot where we haven't talked about looking at a two-theater war since the Cold War. We said we would always be able to do that, and then that goes away when the wall comes down in the 1990s. The Berlin Wall falls. We're back in a situation where we might have to do that. We have a carrier. The Ronald Reagan is in Japan, is in the Pacific. We've got two carrier groups right now. I think this is how we're going to project power for now. But like anything else, readiness for the U.S. military is a function of preparedness, and our active duty forces are probably okay for now. But if you look at history, when the United States, winds up the war machine, it doesn't go well for our enemies. And so I think initially we'll have some
Does
challenges.
that include under Joe Biden as president?
I think the issue is going to be we're going to be tested for our deterrence and whether or not they're going to cross the red line. The question is whether we're going to respond militarily, and I think that's going to happen. I think in the next few weeks. And again, that's again we're talking great, but like Obama did back before in Syria, he didn't do anything when they used gas. Donald Trump gets elected president, and they do the same thing again. And next thing you know, we've got 30 cruise missiles landing in Syria. So
let me ask your thoughts on differences. Right, you see how President Biden wants to tie Israel and Ukraine funding together because he knows that there is a real hesitation to further Ukraine funding, which I really do see as in many ways the fault of Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and how he has approached the United States and other nations, not as so much thankful, but as angry you're not doing more. It was almost a sense of, is that it? Is that all you've got for us? It has not been well received, the photo shoots and other things. But if you were to describe the necessity of supporting Ukraine, the necessity of supporting Israel, there are differences. Take a moment, walk us through the differences as you see it between Ukraine and Israel for the United States.
So first, let's go with Ukraine. Ukraine is fighting against a superior conventional force that has more industrial capability than they do. And history shows that in wars of attrition, those countries eventually win. So what does winning look like for Russia? That means they conquer all of Ukraine. They take over the government. They possess the land. It's a classic, land grab that the Russians have done here. The United States has provided the amount of material, equipment, intelligence in order for Ukraine to at least hold their own. But their strategic objectives are not aligned with the military capability because their strategic objectives is to kick Russia out of places that Russia conquered back in 2014. So that's the disconnect there. If there's one thing that we could possibly do to get them is to admit to that, redraw a border, it creates a DMZ, but that would be the situation that exists in Ukraine. So in that situation, a very strong country, nuclear power, with much more industrial capability, normally wins those kinds of wars. So we're keeping Ukraine from, frankly, being invaded. You go to Israel. Israel is fighting a war of terror. This is against terrorists. This is an old-fashioned, go back to 2005, ISIS in Iraq and the like. Much more difficult situation. Laws of land warfare. Lots of things going on. But the Israelis are going to do, I think, things that the United States wasn't willing to do back then, and that's just literally destroy stuff. They're going to destroy a lot of the infrastructure in Gaza and not apologize for it. They're going to destroy the tunnels. There's going to be collateral damage. They're going to have to, there's a reason why the Egyptians and the Jordanians are not helping, because the Palestinians are just from a population perspective have just not been have not been well organized, and they're not ungovernable. The fact that they allow the leaders that they have, I know we don't want to blame the Palestinian population, but the leaders they have not done them any good. Well, the Israelis are not going to put up with it anymore. So I think that is the difference: fighting a war of terror versus fighting a conventional war in Ukraine, and that's why they're markedly different.
When Israel does indeed respond, talking to Major Mike Lyons, retired United States Army, and you talk about flooding the tunnels with those massive tunnel systems they have, I have questioned whether or not they're going to quite literally raise every building and salt the earth and make the northern part of Gaza simply uninhabitable. Yep. And that, of course, is going to put further pressure on Jordan and Egypt, which therefore will put further pressure on Israel, and then leads to the opportunity for groups like Iran and possibly others to say, how dare you, and further fund Hezbollah to the north. We're already seeing some movement there. We talked about how they sent missiles from Yemen that were shot down by a United States destroyer. Were they heading to Israel? Mm-hmm. The crushing of Hamas and their infrastructure invites the war posture from these Israel haters. Right. This compels the United States to action, or is the United States still capable, or I shouldn't say capable, should they be holding at some arm's length?
Well, I think we've got to be an ally to Israel here. And what Israel needs is an Arab state ally. It's just unfortunate that the Arab world hasn't come to their defense on some level. Again, there's a reason why the Palestinians are not accepted by other Arab nations. The last time this happened, you go back to Black September in 1970, the Palestinians, the Jordanians invite them in to set up camps and the like. Next thing you know, they're hijacking planes, blowing up people, killing civilians, and trying to take over the government in Jordan. So there's a reason. What's Israel to do? They could put Palestinian citizens on buses and start putting food and ship them to Iran. What are they going to really do about the situation? So I think they have to be concerned about their own security, from a top to bottom perspective. And there's going to be some it just is going to come down to, where's this going to go? Is Iran going to attack Israel? Is Hezbollah going to open up? Because again, they're not stopping, and they have a greater military. If all the Arab nations ever got together and decided to, they could probably crush Israel, but they just can't get together for a lot of different reasons, because they really don't trust each other in a lot of ways.
That now brings back my question. If Israel is going to take this posture, if this is going to be the tactic, not that I oppose it in any way, shape, or form, and you then see Iran and others say, how dare you, and for gestures of goodwill or saving face or whatever, they have to engage in a military activity warfare against Israel. Is the United States in? Is the United States, with the Gerald Ford Carrier Group and the Eisenhower Carrier Group in the Mediterranean, are they in? And well, let me start there, and then I'll go to the next question.
Yeah, I think so. First of all, Israel's deterrence is disproportionality. That's their deterrence. So if the Iranians decide to do something dumb, like launch a missile from Iran that they know comes from Iran, or they believe that we've got Iran's footprints on it. Let's face it here. This whole this doesn't pass the red face test, that the Iranians are not involved with this. Their proxies are involved here. The Israelis are going to go attack the Iranian oil capability. They're going to go attack their nuclear facilities. They're going to go 10x. The question is then, what does the Iranians do after that? I just don't believe deep down that the Iranians want to get into a war country to country, because now you strip away this non-nation state like Gaza or Hamas and Hezbollah, the non-nation state aspect of this. Now we're in a real war with another real country. So now Iran's going to think differently before it goes to that spot.
Does it show that, this was the part two I was going to get to, does it show that the United States wasn't being as aggressive by putting these two carrier groups in the Mediterranean as opposed to in the Gulf?
Well, there's a difference. Now, in the Med, there's a choke point there in the Suez Canal, right? So again, the Carney's in the Red Sea, the most strategic location right now, really on Earth, because I'm sure, that when you think about it, those rockets could have also been shot down by an Israeli destroyer, but they weren't. So that I'm sure when there's a rules of engagement going on right now that said the United States is going to fire. So I think that sent a pretty big message. But the Suez Canal, that Red Sea that you have to pass through to get to that spot, and then to go around the bottom towards into Yemen and then back up. I think right now the firepower's got to be in the West. It's got to be in the Med. It's got to be in the Red Sea. And that's why we probably have a couple of destroyers doing independent deployments out there, but I don't think it's the same. I think that it's more important to have those locations in the West, in the Med, and on the Red Sea.
So in your view, not placing them in the Red Sea, not placing them on the other side, I'll call it, of Israel, that wasn't it wasn't a conversation of showing less force. This is the better strategic move.
Yeah, they're more at risk on the. You put a carrier group on the other side now. You might argue that the Iranians would have to fight a two-front naval war from there, but you'd also put them at risk, and that's because it's dividing your forces there. The thing is, the Hamas Hezbollah has anti-ship missile capability. Again, the question is whether or not they'd have the guts to go fire on a U.S. destroyer. Because again, the disproportional response would be you'd get a cruise missile coming back in your other direction. They don't have the level that maybe they can overwhelm those systems, but there's so many of them there right now that we would know where they're coming from.
Major Mike Lyons, retired United States Army. Always appreciate you taking the time to join us and break it down. And can't thank you guys enough for being a part of what we're doing over here. And my thanks to the sponsor, Americans for Prosperity, americansforprosperity.org, economic liberty, free speech, having these conversations, getting an understanding, being able to break down the political and the military, and of course, what it means to us, how we vote, how we're going to move things through, because there's no doubt this is all about election 2024. This is going to come up again and again and again. It's undoubtedly true. Guys, can't thank you enough. Don't forget to subscribe on Rumble. That is the thing to do. Rumble.com/Tony Katz, and find everything at TonyKatz.com. And I'll catch you next time. Take care.